Hey everybody, I'm Dan Joseph with MRC TV. Today I'm joined via Skype by Andrew McCarthy. He is a contributing editor for National Review. He is also the author of the new book, Faithless Execution: Building the Political Case for Obama's Impeachment. We're glad you didn't choose a controversial topic for your latest book, Andrew. First of all, you used the word, and what stood out to me was the word political. When most people think of impeachment, I think they think of somebody doing something illegal, a legal case to be made about an elected official, which either does or does not lead to his removal from office. You say it's not that simple. Tell us what you mean by political case, and even for some of our viewers, explain exactly what impeachment is, because I think a lot of people misunderstand that.
Well, sure, and thank you for having me, and also thank you for zeroing in on the word political, because I really do think it's the more important word in that subtitle than impeachment, because ultimately impeachment, which is the process for charging a high federal official with high crimes and misdemeanors or impeachable offenses and removing that official, ultimately that's a political remedy in our Constitution, not a legal one, in the sense that you can have many dozens of impeachable offenses that can be proven, but unless there is a broad will in the public to remove the official involved, you'll never get the Congress or the Senate, where an impeachment trial is held, to vote by the two-thirds supermajority to remove that official from office. So impeachment's a two-part process. It's got a legal component and a political component. The legal component is you have to show what are called high crimes and misdemeanors. Those are not conventional crimes and misdemeanors like I used to handle when I was a federal prosecutor years ago. They're really, as Hamilton put it, political misconduct. The misconduct of public men was his term for it. And what it really means is breach of the high fiduciary duty that top officials owe to the public.
Okay, so very quickly, in your opinion, what is it that constitutes the justification for Obama's impeachment?
Well, there's a variety of different grounds. I plead 7 articles of impeachment in the book. In fact, the second half of the book is an attempt to plead impeachable offenses much the way that a prosecutor would write an indictment, which I used to do for a living for a considerable period of time. I have 7 different ones. The problem for a writer with the Obama administration and lawlessness is eventually the writer has to stop writing. So it's the book.
Okay, so at the top of the list, though, what is the one that really stands out to you, and the one that if you had to make the political case to the American public, you would lead off with?
Well, I lead off in the book with the failure to execute the laws faithfully, mainly because even if that isn't the biggest attention grabber, it's the easiest one to prove. Old prosecutors like to have a charge in the indictment that there's not much of a defense to. I think even President Obama's most ardent admirers would have to admit that he does not follow federal law. He selectively enforces it. He amends it unilaterally. He changes it at will and at whim. His own Obamacare statute that he pushed hard for example, has been unilaterally amended some 3 dozen times. The president's main job in our system domestically is to execute the laws faithfully as Congress has written them. He doesn't have to enforce laws that he has a good faith constitutional objection to, but President Obama doesn't object to the laws constitutionally. He simply has policy differences with Congress. That's not a basis to not enforce the laws faithfully, and it's pretty easy to show that he hasn't done that. The one that grabs me the most, and I think is more emblematic of the Obama administration, is the Benghazi transaction, which I take back not just to the night of September 11, 2012, when the commander-in-chief, I think shockingly, failed to come to the rescue of Americans under terrorist siege, even though we now know that within the first minutes of the attack, he knew that they were under terrorist siege. But I take this back to the war that President Obama started without congressional authorization and without provocation against a regime that was then held out as an American counterterrorism ally, a war that he waged against the Gaddafi regime under false pretenses. That is, he purported to be acting under a UN mandate for the protection of civilians. He actually used it as a pretext to make war on the regime. under circumstances where it was clear that the war would empower Islamic supremacists in eastern Libya. They followed that up with a shocking failure to provide adequate security for people who were American personnel who were mysteriously assigned to Benghazi, one of the most dangerous places in the world for Americans, when every other country in the world knew it was too dangerous to keep their people there. We not only left our people there, we denied them the security increases and actually decreased the security. That led inevitably to the September 11th attack, and that was followed by this outrageous fraud where they tried to blame what was a massive policy failure, that is Obama's policy of empowering Islamic supremacists. They tried to blame that on a video, the cherry on top of which was to trump up a prosecution against the video producer where he was basically punished for First Amendment protected activity in a prosecution that was held out to Americans as additional evidence that the video caused the massacre, and held out to Islamic countries as an indication of the United States deferring to Sharia blasphemy standards.
Yeah, I mean, you go very, very in-depth about the Benghazi situation here, and I recommend it to anybody who is interested in what really happened with the Benghazi situation. Has to go out and get your book because it's thorough, but it's direct and it's easy to understand. Now, last week, Speaker Boehner sort of became involved in this, and you wrote an article about it. Speaker Boehner has decided to file a lawsuit against President Obama in hopes that it will give Congress standing and that they can adjudicate some of these things and let the courts stop the president from what they see as his overreach of executive authority. You don't believe that's a good idea. Explain a little bit why you're against this.
Well, you really laid it out, Dan, in your question. He says that this will stop the administration, and despite there being a number of reasons why this lawsuit's a kind of a silly idea, the main one is that the federal courts have no power to enforce their authority. When a federal court renders a judgment, it depends on the executive branch to enforce the judgment. So the federal courts can't stop President Obama from doing anything. And that's been evident. Actually, I lay this out in my book as well. There have been a number of judges who've ruled against the Obama administration over the last 6 years, and the administration simply ignores them, much as it ignores the statutes that Congress passes, the terms that it doesn't like. Okay,
but let's be honest here. I mean, if you go down the road of impeachment, it doesn't really matter against what president or what party they're a member of. Right now, whoever does it, the votes simply aren't there in the Senate to convict. So you would be impeaching somebody, and then that would be just about it, right? I mean, what happens afterwards? And this goes into, I think, where you start making the case about political will and building up the political will to do this within the country. Tell us a little bit about how someone would do that, especially when impeachment has become such a controversial issue and such a bad word almost since the Clinton impeachment of the 1990s.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. My book does not argue for President Obama's immediate impeachment because, as you point out, the votes aren't there. And the last thing I want to do is actually encourage presidential lawlessness when what we're trying to do is rein it in. If you impeach President Obama now, when you didn't have enough support in the Senate to convict him, which is the word they use for impeachment, what would happen is the Senate triumph for the president would be spun by the media and the White House as an endorsement of the way President Obama has governed for the last 6 years. So you'd end up encouraging the lawlessness, which nobody wants to do.
Right.
The idea is to create a political climate where it's in the president's interest to conduct himself lawfully, and where the president's heretofore supine opposition feels more confident in meaningful opposition to the president. So what I am suggesting is that they use both of their constitutional tools. Number one, the power of the purse, which is the main way the framers expected that the president was going to be reined in by Congress. We don't have to support either the activities of the administration that violate the law or the agencies of the administration that carry out the law. And those budgets can be cut, those activities can be cut. For example, Congress has already cut money from the administration so that they can't bring enemy combatants at Gitmo into the United States. They can do that sort of thing across the board. And the second thing I say is, simply because you can't at this point impeach President Obama because the votes aren't there, doesn't mean that you can't impeach subordinate executive officials who've been involved in this misconduct. If I were the Republicans, I'd be looking at the IRS, and I'd be moving against officials who carried out that particular egregious scandal, and throw the case into the Senate. If the Democrats want to defend the IRS against the American people, I'd let them do it.
In the end, though, doesn't it really come down to the idea that because of the bureaucracy is so huge, because the president and any president surrounds themselves with so many different people, that there's some aspect of plausible deniability on a lot of these matters that the president can point to when defending himself? Doesn't that always come down as sort of the bottom line that presidents use to protect themselves in the bully pulpit, and the ability to just surround themselves with people that can take the fall?
That is certainly what the president says and what the media says, but as I argue in the book, and I actually make a big point of this, all of the executive power in our Constitution is vested in one official, the President of the United States. The framers did that on purpose because they were worried not only about potential lawlessness, but accountability. And their point was that the actions of every subordinate official in the executive branch are the actions of the president. That's the only power in the executive branch, is the president's power. So, we've set up this sort of fiction where, the bad actors are, whether it's Lois Lerner or Eric Holder or Eric Shinseki or Sebelius or whoever it is this week that we're talking about, as if the president somehow were independent of his own administration and watching it as a spectator. In fact, they operate as his agents. He is responsible for their actions. And in particular, when he protects them, as he's done with many of these officials, and actually encourages them in the lawless activity, rather than, for example, firing them and cooperating with Congress to investigate the misconduct, you have to underscore the fact that he's responsible for it.
All right, so last question. If Congress were to take this road and take the road you're recommending, what is the first step? What do they do tomorrow that starts them off on this path?
I'd start cutting money. But instantly you could do that. And, obviously the president would try to frame it as, the Republicans are shutting down the government. And it's unfortunate you have a government that's so run with transfer payments that whenever the Congress tries to use the power of the purse, they're running the risk of cutting off somebody's goodies. But they simply have to make a competent case that what they're doing is the president is violating the law. We're taking away the money that enables him to do that. And I think that, they may underrate their ability to do that. I don't think it's that hard.
All right, Andrew McCarthy, Faithless Execution, Building the Political Case for Obama's Impeachment. Incredibly interesting read. Thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with the rest of the book tour, Andrew.
Thanks so much for having me.
Take care.